Okay. Thank you very much, Neil. Um, I'm honored to be part of this discussion and to talk on behalf of the European Union on the subjects proposed today. So my presentation today is meant, first of all, to give everybody a flavor of how the European Union is tackling climate change. Also, how this impacts the maritime industry in Europe, and how we partner with national, regional, and international entities to support the Caribbean seas in their own fight against climate change. So, as you well said, um, my presentation will be complemented by a presentation by Vivian Rambarat Parasram, who leads the center, the Maritime Technology Cooperation Center in Trinidad and Tobago. So first of all, the map that you see, I'm sure that you will notice that UK is still there. It's not because we forgot to take it out. It's just because it's because until 2021, UK funds are also part of the European Union cooperation. So they are entitled, and we are honored to have them here on this map. So first of all, what does EU do on climate action? And this, I will start by quickly introducing the climate action as it is understood and carried out by Europeans. Needless to say, like in the Caribbean, in Europe, time has long passed where the decision makers and citizens were still wondering whether or not climate change is an issue to deal with. Of course, scientific and empiric evidence already embedded in education programs and social mobilization are leading Europe towards considerably speeding their pace into fighting climate change. So four factors have played a major role in this. First of all, a huge consensus among the populations. As you can see here, the figures, it's very small, but it can be seen that 93% of Europeans consider that climate change is a serious problem, among which 76, which I think it's a huge amount, consider that climate change is a very serious problem. Also, 92% agree that reducing greenhouse gases emission to a minimum will be the solution for becoming carbon neutral by 2050. In addition to the consensus of the population, we have a strong political will to increase climate action. And this, with the new commission, this political will is getting stronger every day. In the same time, we have a private sector which is ready to play along, as long, and I mentioned this very clearly, as long as the rules of the game are clearly set and the direction is clearly set by the political part. Because nobody wants to cut off parts of their business and to invest in other things when there is no clear sign that we are going to go back to coal mines, or we are going to towards clean technology. So we need to be very clear in order to have the support of the private sector. A fourth element is the availability of data and statistics, and this I think is the only difference that is made with the Caribbean, where the data and statistics, which are key ingredients to all strategies and policies, are lacking in quite a number of sectors. So given these three major factors, the chain of consequences is the following. EU is highly involved in the international forum. For instance, the EU alliance with AOSIS, with the Alliance of Small Island States, and with the African Group of States have have saved the day in Paris in 2015, when the stalemate has blocked everything, and eventually, thanks to this alliance, the COP21 led to the adoption of the Paris Agreement. This involvement in international fora leads to ambitious commitments. So Europe has ambitious commitments. For 2019, we envisage, in 2019, we have envisaged eventually carbon neutrality by 2050 for the whole continent. Based on these commitments, we are drawing ambitious policies, and policy alternatives are proposed and implemented. And these policies, what they do at the end of the day, they channel all the efforts, they redirect the investments, encourage innovation, and eventually will manage to change mentalities, which is the ingredient that is the most needed in fighting climate change. So in this context, the European Green Deal is at this point the most daring, forward-looking, and game-changing overarching strategy and political engagement against climate change, possibly in the world. So, what is the place and the role of the maritime industry in fighting against climate change? First of all, it is a vital sector for EU economy. It's vital for trade because it covers 40% of intra-European trade. It's a viable alternative to air transport, which is known for being not known for being the less polluting sector, and has considerable potential for improvement when we aim to reduce emissions. Secondly, and nevertheless, with 940 million tons of CO2 per year, responsible for 13% of the CO2 and 2.5 greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, it's one of the sectors of concern in the context of the carbon neutrality objective. And thirdly, in the long run, the sector has a high risk of considerable increase in the emissions. For example, the IMO report states that this risk is between 50 and 250% increase of CO2 emissions by 2050, estimated under business as usual. So, given these facts, the EU has launched internally a series of what we call the clean shipping initiatives. First of all, the EU strategy for reducing emissions from the shipping sector, initiated like some 3 years ago, consists in 3 main steps. An MRV phase, which is taking place now, monitoring, reporting, and verification concerning ships of more than 5,000 gross tonnage. This system was put in place by the European Union while waiting for an internationally binding system to be initiated by the IMO, which happened in the meantime, and now the EU is trying to propose amendments and to see how we can adapt to the IMO, adapt the European regulation to the IMO objectives. But for the moment, we still have this system in place, the MRV phase, which consists more concretely of a monitoring component. For example, more concretely, from January 2018, all concerned companies shall monitor CO2 emissions, fuel consumption, distance travel, time at sea, etc. And to report from 2019, every year by April 13, the companies will submit to the European Commission and to their flag states a satisfactory verified emission report for each ship that has performed maritime transport activities in the European Economic Area during the previous calendar year. So those submissions are done through a system which is called TETIS, MRV, of the European Maritime Safety Agency. And this is through this system, they would receive a compliance document, a document of compliance, which from 2019, by 30th of June each year, companies shall ensure that all their ships having performed economic activities in the European Economic Area carry on board this document of compliance issued by the European Maritime Safety Agency. So this being the monitoring and verification step. Now the second step is setting the greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions reduction targets for the maritime transport. The targets set by the Paris Agreement are criticized in Europe as for lacking teeth, because we are compelled to um, cuts the emissions from the maritime sector by 50% by 2050 with a basis in 2008. The EU strategy proposal is that 12,000 large ships that use EU ports in general, cut emissions by 40% by 2030 with reference year 2018. So setting targets is not the easiest thing, but the most difficult is what follows afterwards. When we set targets, you need further measures to be put in place in order to reach those targets. So there are two types of measures that the strategy envisages. First, technical and operational measures, including, for example, slow steaming, weather routing, counter-rotating propellers, propulsion-efficient devices, and other technical solutions. And being all measures that can deliver more fuel savings than the investments required. Within this context, the European Union and the IMO cooperation have put in place a 4-year project, ECIMO Energy Efficient Project, consisting of 10 million euros dedicated to set up the maritime technology cooperation centers in the 5 regions of the world, among which the Caribbean. And Vivian will talk about this. And also this project is supporting the IMO energy efficiency rules and standards under the, for example, the Energy Efficiency Design Index or the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan. The second type of measures, and here come the rough seas, are the market-based measures. There has been talk of introducing the shipping sector under the EU emission trading system, the EU ETS, how it's called by its friends. The Green Deal in Europe is now spreading the concept and speeding up this discussion. So until now, the ETS, the emission trading system, does not concern transport, with the notable exception of the intra-European air transport. So there is a strong opposition from the European Community Shipowner Association, which is seeking alternative solution to market-based measures. This might be difficult at the end of the day to avoid, as the inclusion of ETS will be able to generate funds that can be used to increase ship efficiency. For example, there is a proposal now to create a marine decarbonization fund, of which where 30% of the ETS permit sales to be used for increasing ship efficiency. Another difficulty is to agree on who pays for the ETS permits. Is it the ship owners? Is it the operators? Because in Europe, the practices vary among companies. For example, the giant Danish Maersk owns and operates, whereas the Greek companies generally lease and operate. So that's another dilemma that we will have to solve. A second clean shipping initiative was put in place as more for acting as a platform for wider consultation and technical expertise. So this is the European Sustainable Shipping Forum. The roles of this forum, the main roles are to link up industry with decision makers and to assist in the preparation of legislative proposals and policy initiative. It has 4 technical subgroups, each of them with a clear role, as you see in the slide. I'm not going to insist on them, but for instance, you have the subgroup on sustainable alternative power for shipping, whose role is to assess, for example, the performance and potential of alternative fuel and energy conversion technologies, or to identify the maturity of upcoming technologies. The third of the Clean Shipping Initiative, and the one that cannot be avoided, is the investment in concrete projects under the maritime portfolio of the Connecting Europe facility. This portfolio is 1.2 billion euros dedicated to action in the maritime sector. So, for example, under the motorways of the sea component of this portfolio, 455 million euros are made available to private and public actors for implementing around 50 projects under the following conditions: focus on intra-EU trade, focus on multimodality with multinational and multi-beneficiary consortia, and fall under the program's implementation plan pillars, which are environment, integration of maritime transport in the logistic chain, and safety. So now, because in the first part of the presentation, I aim to inform on the advancement and challenges of the EU maritime industry in the climate change context in Europe, the second part will give you an idea of what EU is doing to support the Caribbean in fighting against climate change. So in our cooperation action, we have 4 main pillars of action in the climate change sector. Of course, we are active in many other sectors like health, security, etc. But when we are talking to climate change and climate change related sectors, we have 4 main pillars of action. And these are climate adaptation, climate mitigation, post-disaster reconstruction, and disaster risk management. In its development cooperation, the European Union works on 3 specific levels. The bilateral level with the nation, bilateral on national level with the country itself, at regional level, and at ACP level. What we call ACP, it's Africa, Caribbean, Pacific level, with which Europe has a particular relation. There is also a secretariat of the ACP countries based in Brussels. And this in reality, this is also a regional level, but with strong connections between the regions. In fact, with many exchanges of experience between the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific regions. So the levels mentioned influence both programming of actions and implementation thereof. For example, at bilateral level, the EU decides together with the governments what the next programming period will focus on, based on both priorities, both actor priorities. For example, based on the EU priorities and the government priorities, we find a common denominator and establish priorities around that common denominator. Right now, for example, we are going to start the programming for the new period, new financing cycle of the European Union, which is the 2021-2027, and we already had discussions with the overwhelming majority of the Caribbean states that have confirmed that climate change is, if not top priority, at least one of the top 3 priorities for all those countries. So as it is a priority for us, it will not be possible to avoid having as a focus for our cooperation climate change in the next 7 years, starting next year. The same for the regional level. In terms of regional level, where we discuss mainly with OECS and the CARICOM and CARIFORUM secretariats. In terms of partners for implementation and dialogue, we have mainly governments, as you can see on the slide, the regional organizations and agencies, but also international organizations, international financial institutions, and civil society. But also, even though we have limited means of working with them, academia, private sector, local authorities are also our partners. EU has presently under implementation and in pipeline 476 million euros of grants allocation for climate change actions in the Caribbean. In terms of sectors of allocation, these figures concerned all the European Union delegations in the Caribbean and the regional level. From the graphics, you can observe that the national allocation is slightly bigger than the regional one. But this, I repeat, is only for the 476 million, which are dedicated to climate change. All in all, our program with the Caribbean is around 1 billion euros at this moment, of which almost half is dedicated to climate change, as you can see. We can also see that climate adaptation projects account for almost half of the amount, followed by mitigation measures and disaster risk management. Now, to give you an idea of how we work, I will give a few examples. With governments, for example, we prefer collaborating through budget support. Budget support means injecting directly the funds that we want to, the funds of our cooperation in the country's treasury. Then we follow a number of conditions and indicators. For example, in Barbados, we had a sector budget support on energy, for which we paid first a fixed tranche that is disbursed on basis on some general conditions, which are, for example, PFM conditions, public finance management, or budget transparency related conditions, or the energy policy itself conditions. After that, we are disbursing the rest of the money upon fulfillment of a set of indicators that we established before with the governments. For example, for Barbados, it was that 30% of the energy in the grid comes from renewable energy sources. If they prove that this is done, then we disburse the amount. It's based on results, disbursement based on results system. With most of the other partners, we work with grant types of contract, like for example, with, sorry, not yet. With international organizations and regional organizations, we work with grants. With international financial institutions, we work also with blending types of operations. But with the private sector, it's more difficult for us to work. Mainly because we have public funds and we have a strong concern of non-distorting competition. Therefore, the support to private sector is done through the Caribbean Export Development Agency at regional level, with three levels of interventions. For example, at micro levels, a firm level, at company level, we give access to finance or support to innovation for increased production, etc. At meso level, we support the business support organizations and the investment promotion agencies in the Caribbean region. And at macro level, we promote private-public partnerships private-public dialogues, and the improvement of enabling environment at country level. Another way of cooperating with the Caribbean is through the European Investment Bank. So the European Investment Bank is very keen on investing in blue economy in the region, and through loans and investments. So, for example, we have the EIB has invested 40 million USD into a 100 million impact investing fund called the Sustainable Ocean Fund, together with organizations like IDB, AXA Investing Managers, and supported by USAID. This fund is investing in 3 areas: sustainable seafood, circular economy, and ocean conservation. Another example is the Clean Oceans Initiative. That is a joint EIB, KfW, and AFD, the financing institutions of Germany and France for development. Initiative that supports low carbon projects aiming to reduce the ocean pollution. After the first year of operation, for example, it has provided already 700 million long-term financing, and its aim to 2 billion euro long-term financing to public and private sector in 5 years. So what are the next steps? And I'm almost done. We don't know exactly what are the next steps because there are a number of unknown elements. But what we know at least the factors that will influence those next steps. For example, the COVID-19 and post-COVID crisis, the growing importance of the Green Deal in Europe, the commitment to support the seats that Europe has, also the still ongoing negotiations on EU multi-annual financial framework for 2021 and 2027. Our desire to better involve the private sector in our cooperation, and the tentative to adapt the financial instruments that we have to present needs and to more impactful actions. For example, we are going to, in the next financing cycle, we are going to have an increasing number of blending operations, guarantees, and etc. What is nevertheless very clear is that the EU cooperation will, with the Caribbean, will continue and will aim to get stronger in an increasing climate vulnerability context.